The US Surgeon General has issued a new public health warning highlighting the stress faced by parents, labeling it as an urgent issue impacting family well being. According to a report titled Parents Under Pressure, nearly 40% of parents often feel so stressed that they struggle to function, with many describing this stress as overwhelming. The report reveals alarming statistics, such as one-third of parents rating their stress levels as an 8 or higher on a 10-point scale. Hello, everyone. I'm Goldie, your host for today.
And I'm Lakshan, your co host. And this is episode 17 of Mind the Gen Gap podcast.
The irony of today's episode lies in the flip side of the coin that comes neatly from the end of last week's episode, which was titled The Anxious Generation. And we spoke specifically about Generation Z. Today, we address the opposite, Millennial and some Gen X parents who are currently parenting our Gen Z or oldest Alpha. The episode will be divided into 3 parts. 1. What exactly is intensive parenting? 2. How did it create the mess that it has? And 3. What can we do about it? I want to start by understanding the reasons behind this situation and why Surgeon General Vivek Murthy issued an advisory of such kind. Such warnings normally are considered very rare in the US, with previous advisories typically focusing on issues like cigarette smoking or gun violence. This time, he is addressing the alarming reality that today's parents are struggling more than ever. The stress levels they are experiencing aren't just typical. Rather, he emphasizes that the challenges of parenting have escalated to a point of becoming an urgent public health crisis. What you heard in the introduction of the podcast today is a result of what is otherwise referred to as intensive parenting, a 24-hour job where you are fully invested in your child's intellectual and social growth. Let me give you some examples. So, when the leaves are changing color in the fall, you ask them why the color of leaves are changing, playing on the floor with them instead of watching them play on the floor. Watching TV is now viewed as a co-viewed activity, and you pause the show and ask them, what are we watching together? I'm understanding clearly that the idea of being more involved means children are able to learn better. But if I'm entirely honest with you, when I see details of such involvement, I personally feel rather exhausted thinking about it, and perhaps it has gone to an extreme. No wonder they are so anxious. You know what doesn't cause any anxiety, guys, though? A simple click for you to reshare, review, and rate our episode. We know you are listening and watching us and love you for that. So show us the love by sharing our Spotify and YouTube links with your community. And now, back to business for today. You're not a parent, Lakshan, but I do want to get a gauge of what all this sounds like to you off the bat.
Yeah, I'm not a parent yet. Hopefully, the near future. Uh, yeah, so Goldie, as you were talking about this intensive parenting or them being, I would say, hyper involved almost with their kids and how they go about the journey of their own childhood. When you mentioned this aspect of it being a 24-hour job, to me it's like, okay, if both parents were able to just take this one thing as a full-time job, fine, but they also have actual full-time jobs and various other areas of life that they have to, or they want to rather, devote time, effort, energy, attention, whatever you want to call it, right? When you are trying to be everything to everyone all at once, including your children, it is a recipe for disaster, because as you were sharing that example itself, I also was getting a little bit exhausted thinking about, God, how would it be like, how it would be like for the parents. I want to share a story that happened very recently. By recently, I mean like last night I found out about this. So my aunt, who is based in Australia, She was supposed to be coming to India sometime this week or next week, something like that. Her flight was for the 21st of December, which is the day after tomorrow. And I got this news yesterday, right? So what happened was her two kids, I think they were playing outside somewhere with a ball and there was a rock or something. And I don't know, someone hit threw a rock at one of the kids and it hit the area near the eye and there was some issue and all that stuff because of which they have to take the kid to like a general physician and then to a plastic surgeon and all these people, and once all of them give a go ahead only then can they travel or something like that is the news that I heard yesterday. So now I was thinking that okay, already my aunt and my uncle are freaking out about having to travel, one, having to travel with kids in general too,
Mm.
and then literally before having to travel this thing happens. So of course they're going to be extra freaked out about what's going on over here, right?
Mm.
Full-time jobs both of them have. How much more can they really do? So when you're talking about this intensive parenting thing, while I won't say that they are intensive parents,
Mm.
just thinking about that one example from yesterday itself made me feel anxious for them.
Yeah.
And if that's the case for them, the ones who are like actively, intensively parenting, it must be, I mean, I don't understand how they're able to function,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah. And actually, as you were speaking, I recognized the investment of energy that goes into being an intensive parent, which obviously requires you to be giving your everything. And if you don't have everything to give, you're going to end up becoming anxious. And as we all know, emotions are contagious. So no wonder we have the children of these parents labeled as the anxious generation. And of course, I know that the reasons for the anxious generation are rather different, but there must be some contribution from these parents who are also suffering in their own right way, as in their parenting. But that's obviously something as a correlation because of the two episodes that have come together one after the other. But I did want to go and do some research and understand exactly what factors have played into intensive parenting. And perhaps this will then invite us to do a contrast of parenting from previous generations. Because as we are, mind the Gen Gap, I do feel that all methodologies that come about stem from past systems having either gone well or needing improvement. And I think this is a very specific scenario where we can apply this. So, part two, the why. There are several social, economic, and cultural factors that do contribute here. First up, we've seen that a significant increase in awareness around child development has come about over the years, especially after the 1990s. So, with a wealth of research available, parents are now more informed about how early experiences can profoundly impact their child's emotional and cognitive growth. This awareness leads to heightened expectations for parental involvement. While being informed, I think, is essential, how do we balance this involvement without crossing into a territory of what we call overparenting? Can we not trust that children will learn naturally through their experiences as well, rather than relying solely on scheduled activities and parental oversight? This is my first question. Next, let's talk about the competitive parenting culture, which has also emerged as a consequence of this. Many parents feel an intense pressure to provide their children with every possible advantage for future success. So, this societal expectation fosters a competitive environment, prompting parents to engage in intensive practices aimed at ensuring academic achievement and overall accomplishments. This competition can lead to increased stress for both parents and children, as we have said earlier on. Are we therefore sacrificing quality family time in order to win a race that may or may not even matter in the long run? Yeah, lots of questions for you. Another factor is the shift in family structure. With more dual income households and single parents as well, there's oftentimes a belief that parents need to compensate for the time spent away from their children and be more involved. So, this can also result in tightly scheduled activities and constant engagement. Does our constant engagement, if not hinder their ability to navigate challenges and develop resilience on their own? And lastly, in this competitive job market that we are so attuned to, parents often feel compelled to heavily invest in their children's education and extracurricular activities. This can lead to, again, lives that are overscheduled and centered around competition, not to mention the heavy financial burdens they are also facing. So there's competition, there's overscheduling, there's finance, there's so many things that contribute to stress. And as we reflect on the myriad of factors that are shaping what we call intensive parenting, we must ask ourselves, are we truly equipping our children for success, or are we merely meeting societal expectations? I've posed a lot of questions, Lakshan, I know. Would you like to share your thoughts on any of them? Pick one.
I'd like to share my thoughts on all of them, but there's too many things to. I think there are so many threads that you've laid out and so much for me to pull on. I don't want to pull on all of them. I think the last question you asked about equipping our children for success versus, meeting societal expectations. I think I want to expand on that because I feel like all the other questions and factors that you mentioned are encapsulated by these two questions. So I think the intention, of course, is to equip our children for success. But as you said, if you are training your children to be on the clock all the time, you are training them to not be present at any given point of time because you're saying this is happening now, but that's happening next. So you can't be present right now because you know what's coming next. You're actively jumping to the next one. Of course, that's what has one of the factors that has contributed to the anxious generation being named as they are. But you as a parent also have to be on top of that, right? So you also need to know what's happening every minute of every day, of every week, of every month, of every year, right? So it's an additional burden on you as a parent as well. Family structure, what you mentioned about, of course, single parents, there is that guilt, no, about one parent having to play dual roles. You say that I'm the father of my kids. They don't have a mother. I have to play the role of a mother as well, and vice versa. So there is that family structure. We spoke about this in episode 5. We spoke about multi-generational living, right? When you are in a setting where you're living in a joint family, you can distribute responsibility when it comes to taking care of kids and various say activities for them amongst the people in the household. But it's not the case now that we're in a nuclear family, and that's another thing to talk about. But I want to touch on this equipping a children for success versus meeting societal expectation thing the most. And I would say that maybe, I mean, I presume it's very different in the West compared to the East. But in the East, I would say that in the name of equipping your child for success, you are trying to meet societal expectations because you care a lot about what will other people say. And I want to take an example of someone who's fairly close to me. And she's someone who had no interest in studying for law, but she did it anyway because her parents asked her to do it because it's a prestigious thing to do. And they are also, I won't say forcing, but they're, let's say, nudging her to pursue her master's because that also is good. And to go about following the path of judgeship because, again, that is prestigious. And the idea is that, hey, you equip yourself with whatever you need to go and get a government job because, of course, one is that there's a safety aspect of it. You won't lose your job and all that, but also because you'll be looked at in a particular way. Now, this person really has no interest in doing any of this stuff, But parents look at it differently, because for them it's almost as if they want to live vicariously through their children. So whatever they were not able to do for themselves, they want to do it for their children. Now, in one way, it's nice. The intention is nice because you want to give your child a better life than you had. But offering them opportunities to have a better life versus shoving it down their throats,
Mm.
uh, I think that's two very different things.
Yeah.
And these are some of my thoughts on a lot of the questions that you posed. But I think I covered quite a bit on each of the factors.
You know, everything that you said brings one word center stage to this conversation. And, I want to throw it out there: ego. So, being a parent is, in this case, a full time job, as we've realized in intensive parenting. It's how well I show up as a parent for my child. It's how much I can give to my child in terms of education. It's how well they can live the dreams that I could not fulfill and follow them through, as you mentioned in your example. But there's a lot of I there, isn't there? Indirectly, there's just a lot of ego, which I'm not sure is entirely relevant to the conversation today, but on a spiritual level, I'm finding this to be something that's coming up for me as we address this topic. And everyone knows that too much of an ego can be harmful to both the party that's, exercising it, but also the receptive nature of it, whoever's receiving it. And, this, I think, neatly brings us to part 3, which is solutions. As we have discussed, the various repercussions of what this form of parenting has had, it is but obvious that we want to undo what has been done, right? And as I was doing the research for these solutions, I observed a circle back to basics formula. Let me explain. Extensive research has shown to us that intensive parenting often leads to parental burnout, while negatively impacting children's competence and their mental health. So it's not like anyone's really winning here, frankly speaking. We need to also observe that intensive parenting has actually stemmed from previous methods known as helicopter parenting or bulldozer parenting. These mentioned are actually alternatives forms of the same, whilst the focus is still on the children, but from a more micromanagement perspective. So very similar to the example used, Lakshan, about following my dreams through because I wasn't given the opportunity. Now, this issue has actually been brewing since the mid to late 20th century. So it's nothing new. And it's escalated to what has now become a crisis for parents themselves now. So it's almost like karma has taken a full circle and hit the parents on the face. As a solution, what parents truly need isn't another admonition to avoid micromanaging, their kids, but a practical strategy to shift their approach in a way that still feels satisfying. So this is where the concept of good enough parenting becomes relevant. And can you believe, Lakshan, this was first coined in 1953 by a British pediatrician and psychologist, Donald Winnicott. The idea can be refreshed and adapted for today's parenting challenges. So what are we observing here? It's like we have returned back to the baby boomer generation of parenting, have we not? So, the concept of good enough parenting does not actually imply being mediocre or having indifference, as much as the word may seem like that. Instead, it involves understanding that there comes a point when striving for perfection can be counterproductive. And as I was reading and researching on this, it actually occurred to me previously, the word parent has always been addressed as a noun, like a wife or a husband or a friend. But do we ever ask a wife, are you wifing correctly? Are you husbanding well? Or are you friending me well? Yet, parenting suddenly became a verb. And it's turned into a competitive one, nonetheless. Just like, my little disruptive moment there. So, developmental psychologist and philosopher Alison Gopnik compares this style of parenting to gardening. The idea of gardening already calms me down, frankly speaking. So, whilst intensive parents are actually referred to as carpenters, where you're meticulously shaping their children to fit a specific mold, gardening parents focus on nurturing an environment of love, safety, and stability, allowing their children to flourish in diverse and sometimes unpredictable ways. To move away from intensive parenting, we must therefore do so thoughtfully and deliberately, recognizing it is as a matter of adjusting various parenting dials. It's like a dial, rather than following strict, rigid instructions. Now, this recalibration requires dismantling a lot of societal myths, coming back to what does society expect, and that, and overemphasizing the impact of everyday parenting choices. So we need to move away from what the rules are, what society is expecting from us, and especially this whole competitive environment that we are in. And moreover, we need to shift our focus, so the ego, onto the child's optimization, the parent's well-being, and normalizing this idea that fulfilling adult lives positively influences good parenting. If I'm happy, you will be happy. And I could not actually help but make a parallel here, Lakshan, with different forms of leadership that we are so familiar with in coaching. It's like trial and error, isn't it? Based on your teams and how the company chooses to operate, based on their values and their mission statement. So, how do you see this idea of good enough parenting, Lakshan? Any creative things coming up for you?
I think good enough parenting. First of all, I was surprised that it's a term coined about 70 plus years ago. I mean, that's crazy to me that something was relevant back then and we have to, that's a higher level of relevance right now. Maybe not a high enough level of adoption yet, but I think us bringing awareness to it is one step in making that a possibility. With respect to good enough parenting, I think there's a parallel with coaching, because one thing that we say in coaching is that you trust the client, right? So have faith in the client, in this case, in the context of parenting, have faith in the child and allow them to do their thing. Like you do your thing, don't shove everything down the child. You allow them to, gardening was the metaphor you used, so treat them that way. No, don't be so meticulous about everything. Allow them to grow. You provide the environment, but you allow them to grow. They are the ones doing the growing at the end of the day, right? Of course, it's very very easy for me to say. I'm not a parent. People will say, who the hell are you to say this? But I think that's the approach that my parents took with me. My mom was someone who was maybe more of the meticulous kind, a little more, not too much more, but she was never the kind of person who was like, I never had this life, so I want you to have it, kind of a thing. No, she would make sure that when I was in school, that things were happening in a particular way. My dad, on the other hand, was a little different in the sense that he still believes in us. He believes that he's done everything on his end to allow us to flourish. Basically, we have the toolkit to succeed. We just have to use it, and he's just going to allow us to do that. And trial and error was another term that you used, Goldie. And I think that's helped me and my brother turn into well-adjusted kids in a time when finding people like that is unfortunately a rarity. So, if I were to look at the way that both my parents approached this thing, there was a difference. But I think what really helped me growing up was the fact that they set an example for everything that they told us.
Yeah.
So we were able to learn from just watching them rather than being told do this, do that, and all that stuff. So I think that's another thing you mentioned about when you spoke about leadership and such. So that's what's coming up to me. Any other creative solutions do I have? I think this is wonderful. Just allowing the children to be children. Again, keeping a watch over them, making sure that they don't go off, track too much. but allowing them to do their own thing as well. So it's finding that blend, no?
Yeah, that's beautiful because there's always going to be room for competition, isn't there, in life? There's so much to remember that the world is never going to leave you off a competition. So this comes to at the right time to conclude and bring our conclusions together for today's episode. If we're moving away from a competitive a scarce mindset to one that's rooted in collaboration and abundance, we can foster a healthier approach to parenting that can embrace the good enough rather than perfection. And the landscape of parenting is certainly one where nobody will ever begin with a degree or a master's in hand. Every generation will always have its challenges. In fact, I personally believe you can only become a decent parent by learning from your child first. It's a true teamwork, just as I mentioned in the corporate world. So I want to end my thoughts with the philosophy of a clinical psychologist called Shefali Sabari, who has advocated this very unique approach to parenting that combines a mix of Eastern philosophy and parenting. I very much resonate with this. Her focus is on self awareness in parents, leading to healthier relationships with their child and children. And one of her pioneering concepts is actually called conscious parenting, which encourages parents to become more aware of their own emotional triggers first and their behaviors in relation to their children. And so I leave you all with a question today. Whether you are a child or a parent, what kind of lessons are you learning in your respective roles? With that, we come to the end of episode 17 of Mind the Gen Gap podcast. I've been your host, Goldie.
And I've been your co-host, Lakshan. Thank you so much for listening, watching, and tuning in all the way to the very end.
Muchísimas gracias por todo.
See you in the next one.
Hasta pronto.
Bye.